One of the most common and most spurious defences against Gamergate's appropriate concerns about censorship is to dismiss those concerns as criticism isn't censorship. Now, technically that's true, but the trouble is that what most people understand by criticism is not what your social justice warrior means by it. As most of us would understand the term criticism, we would think of it in terms of the analysis and judgment of the merits and faults of a literary or artistic work. So a film critic watches a film and gives their assessment of its plot, cinematography, storytelling prowess, acting, set design, and so forth. We might also think of this in terms of constructive criticism, offering reasoned, valid analysis with the hopes of making things better. Literary criticism, by contrast, is the study, evaluation, and interpretation of literature. While it's called literary criticism, it can be applied to many different art forms, including games and films. The emphasis here is on interpretation. The trouble with literary criticism and the related field of literary theory is that it is all completely subjective, sometimes willfully so, and as such its interpretations are only really true for the individual applying it. They can tell you essentially nothing about the work itself, only about the person doing the interpretation. Literary theory is a set of lenses through which literary criticism can be applied. A literary critic, using feminist theory for example, might subject a piece of art to examination based on the Bechdel test, or unsupported hypotheses such as objectification or patriarchy theory. Obviously, to use these lenses is to deliberately and willfully invite a huge amount of subjective bias, something not normally invoked in any serious study or academic discipline. These fields normally strive for objectivity, insomuch as such as possible. Literary criticism need not be entirely useless. It may be able, in aggregate, to help us understand how people interpret different symbols, metaphors, similes, music, palettes, etc. But in individual cases it remains largely useless, save for understanding the critic, and relies overmuch on the arrogant conceit of the death of the author, that is, that the author's intent doesn't matter. Critical theory, as defined by the OED, is a philosophical approach to culture, and especially to literature, that considers the social, historical, and ideological forces and structures which produce and constrain it. As with literary criticism, to which critical theory is in part related, the problem with this is that it tells you more about the critic, or at least the ideology that they're employing, than the subject of the criticism itself. This philosophical lens that they apply is distorting to such a degree that it can only really tell you something useful about a product that derives from that same philosophical basis, deliberately and willfully. Critical theory is also steeped in cultural Marxism, stemming as much of it does from the Frankfurt School of socio-political thought. As such, it was originally predicated upon the idea that fictional and cultural constructs are operating tools of oppression that shape a culture, rather than deriving from a culture. In cases of cults, closed societies, or propagandist totalitarianism, this may be a valid point, but in a pluralistic media landscape, it's clearly nonsense. Modern critical theory, at least as applied by activists, applies the same idea to a wide variety of different causes and ideologies and takes it further. Any examination or attempts to understand the topic in question are to be deplatformed, lest they cause damage. True, actual criticism strives for objectivity and distance. It assesses an artistic artifact on its own terms and adjudges its success. Some of these matters are subjective, some are objective, especially when it comes to games. Literary criticism is entirely subjective, and as such can tell you little or nothing about the artifact or product in question, and a great deal about the critic. Literary criticism is not "this is," but rather "I think," or "this made me feel." This has no real place in a consumer review, and is of the quality and type you get in a small conversation with friends. Critical theory only tells you about the ideology of the critic, not the quality, intent, execution, or true nature of the artifact being assessed. It's literary criticism writ large. Of the three forms of criticism, literary criticism is probably the most problematic, to coin a phrase, as it relates media content to real social problems, apparently as a means of justification for not liking something. As such, it acts as a sort of philosopher's stone to transmute a matter of taste into a matter of policy, which is then used to justify censorship, control, and limitation. Literary criticism and critical theory have their place in commercial product assessment. in editorials. If you want to know about the actual product, stick with those who simply and purely, genuinely are critics.